Welcome back to another chess game analysis video. So I know I haven't uploaded YouTube videos and I haven't streamed for more than a month. I was in Singapore and then I was sick. You still hear it a little bit in my voice, but I still want to get back into YouTube videos and streaming. So next few days and weeks stream and once a week YouTube video if I get to it. I hope so. I have got more time now. Today I want to show you a very nice game that I found on the YouTube channel The Big Greek. If you speak German, you can check him out. He's a great YouTuber and quite famous actually. If you don't, alright, I'm gonna cover the video in English, the game in English. I think it's a very interesting game from the Romanian Championship that features quite a few nice motifs, also a nice opening debate that I wanted to take a look at for myself, since I played a Caro-Kann. And there was e4, c6 Caro-Kann. You also see, I don't even know how I did it, but I somehow managed to import the time from the time of the two players. So you basically see how long they sought for each move on the bottom and the top corner. I think it's very nice. Sometimes we can talk about this as well. Time is also an interesting aspect. You see it's a classical format, Romanian Championship. And the players are Sabo, I'm not going to try to pronounce the first name, and we have Stepanenko. Two strong players, and let's see what happened in this game. It's a very interesting one, I think. e4, d5. Also for some of you who like a lot of tactics, I think it's interesting. e5, the advanced variation, one of the most critical variations against the Caro-Kann. If you want to really test your opponent, you should go for this. Grabs space in the center, not trading the pawn. Now the two main moves are like a c5, attacking the center immediately, or first developing the bishop. Here Stepanenko decides to go for this bishop f5 move, which is perfectly playable. h4, trying to trap the bishop in blitz. Sometimes it happens that your opponent plays e6 and you already see the engine, because here just g4 just traps the bishop. The bishop has a couple more moves, but eventually it gets trapped, and on the 7th move you already win a piece, which is basically losing. So h5 is here to prevent the entrapment of the bishop. So not e6 first, but h5 first. Afterwards you always have time to play e6 and develop this other bishop. So h5, main move, bishop d3. Now the bishop can get traded. It's otherwise too strong if you just leave it on this diagonal. Bishop takes d3, queen takes d3. And now queen a5 check. Normally you say that you shouldn't move your queen so early, but I think it's perfectly playable. That's one of the main moves here. You try to basically lure one of the pieces on d2 and then you go back with the queen at some point. Knight d2, the most popular variation here. There is very interesting b4. I also saw a couple of games that featured this move. It's a pawn sacrifice after the black player accepts it, knight d2. And after development with e6, you have rook b1, and it's an unclear position. You sacrifice one of the, you sacrifice your b pawn, but at least you have some pieces that are participating in the game. Space advantage in the center. The engine says that it's a valid sacrifice. You can actually do this. Maybe you should take a look at a little bit of theory before just sacrificing the pawn. Otherwise, it's just risky. But you have counterplay here. b4. Maybe I should take a look at this, because I'm also a Caro-Kann player. Other move in this position is bishop d2, but afterwards the queen sometimes goes to a6 and wants to exchange itself, bring the knight into the game. And also in this variation, black doesn't really have a lot of problems. It's not that critical. Knight d2, on the other hand, is what pros often play if you look at the database. e6, we have development. We are still very much in theory. A lot of this has already been played. Knight f3, knight h6. A good move. The knight gets rerouted over h6 and wants to go to this outpost on f5, which is a very nice square that has been weakened by white, and you can never really get rid of the knight by pushing g5 because you have an h-pawn that can capture. So very nice outpost here. The knight very strong. This is the disadvantage of pushing e5, is that the square gets weaker. But we have castle, knight f5. A good outpost now. c5, immediately attacking the center. This is one of the critical moves. You can do this. Bishop e7, now attacking this h-pawn, which gets defended with castles. And Black is also very nicely developed. You see the time on that the two players actually thought about this. Stepanenko seems like he has hardly thought about his moves, and Sabo has already spent a little bit of time. You see it's a classical format. You can take your time also in the opening to find the critical variations. That's something I always recommend. We have B3, something that the engine doesn't really like, but it's the main move in the position if you take a look at the database. Rook D8 centralizing the rook. And now something that doesn't really make sense for me, because you play B3. I thought you would basically put this bishop onto the long diagonal, support your center. Something that a lot of Grandmasters have played in recent games, but this would work very nicely together, I think. B3 and putting the bishop behind this nice pawn chain on the light squares and the bishop on the dark squares. First of all, Sabo centralizes the rook. Maybe you can do this. The engine doesn't really approve. I think bishop b2 would be much more logical, but rook d1, bring the rook in the center. Nothing is lost now. c5, striking the center. D takes c, queen takes c. Now we have knight f1. Rerouting and trying to stabilize here. I think also the queen and the rook are now connected. D takes c4. An inaccuracy. Better would have probably been just to develop knight c6. And now the rooks are connected. And why is this important? Because when the rooks are not connected in this position, you have a very nice move. And the only move that keeps white in the game, because white is already in a little bit of trouble because the opening was not so accurate. Queen takes d8, sacrificing the queen for a bishop and a rook, which is interesting. Normally, not enough compensation. Normally, a bishop and a rook are not worth a queen, but now you have problems. The king is a little bit open, this rook doesn't participate. The knight, also a bad piece because it can't develop because the rook is just hanging. So black is a little bit underdeveloped here. You could also argue that these pieces have not moved, but still, the engine approves of the playstyle of white in this position and says it's an equal game. But you see, unbalanced positions are always interesting. Material-wise, black is up 2 pieces or like 2 points, but it's still equal here. We have knight e3 development. Now, at some point you want to go in here and cause trouble. Queen a5. Knight g5 check, king g6, knight g2. Now trying to come in here, and let's just quickly see what happens if you let this happen. If you play a silly move like a6, just a waiting move, then knight f4 check, king h6, rook h8, checkmate. So the two knights and the pawns work very nicely together. The rook very active on the a4 rank here. So you see there are already issues if you do nothing. By the way, if you just if you take the rook here in the that was undefended with the queen, then also a problem with this knight. With these two knights, they are very strong here. Knight f4 check, king has to go to h6. Then you pick up the queen with this fork, and in the end you are up material. So the engine already says this is winning, also underdeveloped, and you probably can't play like that. So the one move that would have saved the game is knight h6, I think, in this position. He took on g3. Knight h6, and after this check, king f5, and I can understand that the king probably doesn't feel very nice here on f5, but this would have been one of the continuations that you could have gone for. And maybe it feels a little bit strange playing with this king. All the pieces can maybe come in here, but it would have been safe actually. So you could have played like that. Probably afraid of these whole variations. He took on g3, sacrificing this knight, but it's a little bit questionable, the move now. The position is again equal. Knight f4 check. You don't take the knight, you bring pieces into the attack because you want a checkmate. King f5, knight takes f7, and you see the very nice harmony here. Black is underdeveloped, still with the king on f5, it looks very ugly, and there are also checkmating patterns that occur here in this position. Queen c3, now a good move from black, attacking the rook and defending the knight. if you take here, then there are maybe triple repetitions and stuff. Rating wise, if you take a look at the rating, I think black would probably be alright with a draw against a strong player like Sabo. So king g2, not taking the knight, but rather now maybe preparing to take the knight. Knight e4, centralizing the knight, saving the knight. Let's take a look what happens if you actually take the rook, which was undefended on a1. It's a mistake according to the engine, and I think the analysis shows that after knight d6 check, you have something like king takes e5, knight takes on c4 with check, king f5. The king just gets kicked around by all these knights, which are very strong, and with this nasty active rook here, rook f8 check, king e4, king takes knight, and you have problems. If you take the bishop, for instance, f3 check, king has to go to d4, and then the knight just picks up the queen, and you again up material and completely winning in this position. So I think probably Stepanenko didn't want to go into all these variations of taking the rook, so he just centralized the knight. He's still up material if you take a look at the points, but with these pieces not participating in the game, it gets very ugly to play. Rook f8 now, threatening a discovered check on the queen, on the king. King g4, and this is basically one of the losing moves. Better would have been actually knight c6. Interesting, you sacrifice the rook, but now it's possible to take this rook on a1, and after rook f8 you have an equal position, but slightly better according to the engine for black, but very hard to play, I think, in the practical issues to in this variation also. I think it's a very hard position for black, and it shows that often if you sacrifice material, you put your opponent into a tough position with this king in the center. Very hard to play. So after rook f8, he decided to go king g4, and there was a very nice, interesting variation here. Bishop e3 was played. There is actually a forced mate in 7, and I wanted to show this because I think it's a pattern that occurs afterwards as well. Knight h6 check. Now basically, if I'm going to show you first what happens if you take here on h4, then just knight g6 is checkmate. You already see the knights are very dominant here. The bishop also helps cover some of the squares. The rook cuts off the king. So instead of taking here, you basically take the knight, but it's not much better because knight d3, I think a brilliant move, restricts the queen's access here, and it prepares the rook to checkmate on f4. So you can basically take this pawn. If you take the knight, then rook f4 is checkmate. So you take the pawn, but it's not much better. Bishop takes h4, and you see the pieces are just ready to checkmate the black king, which is on h4. A very strange middle game based king. I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show this game, because that rarely ever happens. These sacrifice games have become quite rare in recent times in history. You can block with the queen, but you sacrifice the queen, and after the knight takes rook g8, and now you see this very nice stalemate, which can't really be prevented anymore. So this would have been a very nice continuation, and mate in 7. Very hard to see, I think. Knight h6 checkmate. I wanted to show you this variation because this maneuver with the knight is something that will happen in our game. He first developed the bishop e3, which makes sense, also prepares the rook to come in here. Now knight takes f2, knight d3 attacks the queen. Also, all these knights, if they are here, they prevent the rook to come in here and checkmate. That's like one of the patterns that we see, the rook on f4 to checkmate here, because everything is covered around the black king. So knight d4, knight d5 clears one of the knights out of the way, so the rook can finally enter. Queen takes rook in the corner, but it doesn't help, because now he saw what the pattern knight h6 check, which is, I think, a very nice maneuver that he finally saw it. King takes h4. If you eliminate the knight, then it's just checkmate. So very nice sacrifice to actually help the rook to come into the game. Knight h6 check. King takes h4. Now we have bishop takes f2 check, and you see all the pieces are very dominant of white, even though black is up 6 points of material if you just count, but it doesn't really help. King g4, g5, bishop e3 check, king g6, knight e7 check, and if you want to find the mate in 12 or the combination how to win the game, you can always stop the video. King h7. By the way, there are some only moves here, like this one, knight f7 is the only move that wins the game. The knights are very strong here. Rook h8 checkmate is the threat, so you have to stop this by sacrificing the rook in the corner, which prolongs the game a little bit. Knight g5 check, king h6, knight f7 check, king h7, and we have seen this position 2 moves ago, so basically the white player, also a very nice strategy, repeats 2 moves in order to reach time control and to gain increment as well. If you have to reach 36 or 40, I don't know how they play. If you repeat twice, it's like one of the lessons that Karpov always said, former world champion Karpov. If you have the chance to repeat a position in a forced way, then you have to do it. So you have 2 moves less to reach time control and then checkmate or find the very nice winning combination with time control. So he did it here very nicely. Knight g5 check, king h6, knight takes e6 check. You see, he plays around a little bit, giving a couple of checks, taking a pawn, and it's always very forced. The king doesn't have a lot of squares anyway, the pieces are just too dominant here. King h7, knight g5 check, king h6, knight f5 check, king g6, knight h4 check. He's slowly but surely getting the knights where he wants them to be, so it's a very nice checkmate pattern. King h6, you see not a lot of moves. Now you could checkmate here if it was not for this rook, still defending this square. Knight f7 check, king h7, knight g5 check, king h6. We see the same pattern that I just talked about, repeating the moves once, so you get a little bit of extra time. Rook takes a8. So now the rook has been eliminated. Now it's a checkmate threat here. You see this knight is defended by the bishop. This knight very nicely restricts the black king. And you have 2 own pawns that unfortunately in this game you can't capture because it's your own material. So this is just a threat and not a lot that you can actually do about it. g6 has been played. And now you just attack this pawn, because if you take here, you know this knight also covers this square, so if you take here it's also checkmate. Knight takes e5, covering the square. And now you think, oh, you can't take there because the knight actually covers the square, so it's not checkmate anymore. Basically correct, but you still take. Rook takes g6, and now it would be checkmate, but the knight still can take. And now it's basically this knight covers here. So you basically need to attack the king and cover this square, which is knight f5 checkmate. 3 minor pieces. And the black king on h6 is mated. I think a very nice game. Attacking game, sacrificing a queen for a bishop and a rook, and then with the 2 knights, especially these knight maneuvers are very tricky, especially on low level. I hope you enjoyed watching this game. I very much enjoyed analyzing it. I think it's a very nice game, and it shows very nicely the attacking maneuvers that you can do, and also this maneuver of repeating moves to gain time, I think is very illustrative. I should implement that into my own games sometimes. I have done so, I think, in like one of the classical games. Also, you can win without reaching time control if you're just good enough. Suggest me games that you want me to analyze if you have something. And I'm going to continue with my endgame series, with my opening strategy series, and we're gonna start with middle game series. I also planned like a 200 subscriber special where we analyze a couple of games in one large video. I hope you enjoy this with like all Caro-Kann traps, thematics, so you learn a little bit. I hope to see you in the next streams or in the next video. Bye for now.